Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Oh, welcome to this podcast review for June 17th, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for this conversation. This is going to be an interesting one for a couple of reasons. One, my son is going to join us at a certain point, or at least join me for part of this conversation. We pre-recorded a little segment with him to get his thoughts on the new live action How to Train Your Dragon.
Yeah.
We weren't able to work it out scheduling wise for the three of us, but we did want to get him back on the show. So we did record a segment with him, and we'll get to that here in a little bit.
Yeah.
To begin this conversation, and the other reason that this discussion here is going to be interesting is that Brendan and I have a pretty rich history with this franchise. We are big fans of How to Train Your Dragon. I think that trilogy on the whole is really, really great. Those first two films, I think, are as good as any animated film we've maybe ever seen.
The second one, probably the greatest animated sequel ever made, or at least in the conversation.
Yes, I think so. And that context, I do think, is important. Not only do I think that first How to Train Your Dragon, and I assume you feel the same way, Brendan, of course.
Yeah.
Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But that first How to Train Your Dragon, masterful. Absolutely.
It's great.
Incredible. One of the best animated films. And I agree with Brendan's sentiment. I think How to Train Your Dragon 2, it might be the most underrated. And I know that term is often thrown out there, but I do think in this case that sequel, How to Train Your Dragon 2, might be the most underrated animated film ever made, because it really isn't talked about in that light outside of this very specific circle, Brendan and I.
Yeah.
But we have championed that film since it came out in 2014 as one of the very best animated sequels to ever hit the silver screen.
Yeah.
And I still believe that. I still very, very much believe that.
Yeah.
Which
I
is
feel
to
like
say, to emphasize how much we love those movies.
Yeah, I feel like if you were to poll a good chunk of people who love animated movies and you ask them all, what are the two best animated sequels ever made? More likely than not, the top two would be two movies that both include the words toy and story in the title, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing or an incorrect thing, but I do think How to Train Your Dragon 2 is just as good as those two in its own way.
Agree.
I think
agree.
it should be in that conversation.
I completely agree. And don't get me wrong, I do think the Toy Story sequels are great. Obviously, I think they're great.
Yeah.
I hate to sound perhaps even more contrarian here, but recently I watched Toy Story 2 as part of an exercise we're doing later on in the year for 1999.
Yeah.
And that film is really good. I do like it. I don't know if I'm as high on it as others tend to be. It's not a 5-star masterpiece, let me put it that way. But it does have maybe some of the best scenes, individual scenes that Pixar has ever rendered. I would go that far as Toy Story 2 goes. But I do think that film is a solid 3 of that initial trilogy. Still really good. I much prefer it to Toy Story 4, for example.
Well, Toy Story 4 doesn't really exist anymore for me.
Exactly.
I think I'm higher on Toy Story 2 than you are. I would take it over the original Toy Story. I think what made me appreciate Toy Story 2 is after having seen Toy Story 3 and how crucial Toy Story 2 is for making Toy Story 3 as great as it is. As a middle trilogy, segment, if you will, I think it is a masterful film, and I've learned to appreciate it more in that way. And it does have individual highs that really rival anything Pixar has ever done. So I do like Toy Story 2 quite a bit. So I want to be careful with how we say that because I'm not trying to undersell that movie in any way or anything like that. It's good.
And I'm not, again, I don't want to come off too contrarian here. The reason I say that is to say that's partially where I'm coming from with How to Train Your Dragon 2, is that I don't think that Toy Story 2 is some grand masterpiece, but I do think it's a really, really good animated sequel. I think Toy Story 3 is much closer, perhaps ironically, because that came out the same year as the first How to Train Your Dragon. However, Toy Story 3, I think, is much closer to that 5-star masterpiece that people may claim for it.
It's the Toy Story film I would say is a top 10 Pixar film. I tend to lean more towards Pixar's more individual efforts that aren't franchise related, unless it's The Incredibles.
Sure.
I tend to like the one-offs more than anything else, but Toy Story 3 is a very, very masterful film. That's easily my favorite Toy Story film.
Yeah. So I say that to say, because to your point, the Toy Story sequels often are the films brought up into this. But what about these movies? Okay. Yeah, those movies are great.
Yeah.
But I think How to Train Your Dragon 2 is just as good, if not better. And I might lean toward being better than at least Toy Story 2. I do like it, and I would argue, even in an objective sense, I know it's film, I know it's objective, but removing my subjectivity from it.
Maybe I would. Maybe I would.
I think I would. Now, Toy Story 3, that might be a little bit more debatable. But either way, the point is it's very much in the conversation. That's ultimately the point that I and we are trying to make here. And that first How to Train Your Dragon is a full-on masterpiece on its own right as well, much like that, or much like much of Pixar's movies. In fact, like I've argued forever, and again, maybe this is simply contrarian of me. People might call me obtuse or myopic. I don't know. Especially because other DreamWorks movies are beloved. The Shrek films, not for me, but clearly a lot of people do love them.
I like Shrek 2 quite a bit. That's actually my Shrek. My favorite Shrek film is the second one.
Yeah. We're not, at least I'm not a huge champion of that franchise. And I do agree with you. Shrek 2 is really good. The Kung Fu Panda movies, again, I really love, but I'm not.
They're fun. They're fun. Yeah. Like, Pixar mostly does, not Pixar, DreamWorks mostly does a great job delivering diverting animated entertainment. Unless, of course, it's How to Train Your Dragon or The Wild Robot, most recently. Those are very much outliers in their canon in many ways.
And the reason, again, I say all of that is to say, again, at the risk of sounding obtuse or myopic to anyone listening out there, I think if you were to swap the logos, DreamWorks to Pixar, now I understand the aesthetic is certainly more DreamWorks than conventional Pixar.
Yeah, but the narrative framework and the emotionality of them is still very Pixar-like. Yeah.
Exactly. If you look at the thematic structure, the emotionality of those films, the music, it is much more Pixar-like than DreamWorks. And I think if you just swap the logos, you just didn't tell anyone. Like someone coming in to watch those movies for the first time, and you just swap out the DreamWorks logo for a Pixar logo, and they go in with that reputation in mind, and they watch those movies, I think the reputation of How to Train Your Dragon overnight changes.
I think that absolutely happens with the Wild Robot.
Tenfold.
Even the animation style of the Wild Robot feels Pixar-like.
Yeah, I agree. And perhaps that's partially why people did respond to it.
Maybe.
Anyway, I lay all that out to say we're big fans. That will play a big role into our conversation here. The other thing I want to lay out here before we get into the film, my wife sent me a TikTok that was some guy. I don't know who he is. Maybe he's big on TikTok. I don't know. I don't live on TikTok all that much.
Yeah, same.
But it was a semi-viral TikTok going around. And it was a guy he loved this new live action movie, adored it, and went on about 3-4 minutes talking about how much he really loved it. The experience was great. Everyone in his theater responded to it. They were all emotionally moved by it. And on its own terms, in a vacuum, it was really endearing to hear.
Mm-hmm.
What was really noteworthy about it, though, is I go through all of the comments and I cannot begin to emphasize enough, Brendan. I wanted to post them on Twitter, but I didn't necessarily want to call out these people. That's just not my style. So I ended up deleting that specific tweet and ended up doing something else instead.
Okay.
But it is not hyperbole to say that every comment on that TikTok was some version of, this is exactly what I wanted. Disney, take note. This was great. This is exactly what these live action remakes should be doing. Every comment was some version of that.
That is a great point, because I think that is going to play a huge role into our thoughts and our overall conversation on not just the movie, but the existence of this movie.
Yeah. And look, I'm not trying to yuck anyone's yum. I'm glad that people are really liking this film and they're responding to it in some way. But I do think there is a general disconnect between what cinephile and critics see, and even a lot of critics that have talked about this film fall into some version of, yeah, it's beat for beat the same. It's not great, but it's endearing. It's fun.
Well,
it
that
channels
brings up
enough of an energy.
That brings up the big question that I do want us to ponder on when we get to the movie itself. This movie, this new How to Train Your Dragon, being such a shot-for-shot remake of the animated movie, why is this the one that seems to be winning some of those cynics over a bit more than some of its live-action Disney counterparts? And I think it is a fair. That's a very fair question, because that is something I feel like, while I wouldn't say this version is being universally loved or anything like that, there is more forgiveness being thrown at this one when compared to what Disney has been doing. And I think it is an interesting situation to think about.
I think there is an answer to it. I think there's one name to invoke when it comes to that. Maybe we can save that for later. I don't know.
I think that's fair. I think I know what name you're going to say. And for some reason, I think I'm going to say a different name.
Okay. And I could be wrong. I don't know. But I did find that to be an interesting insight. And I don't think my wife is wrong.
Yeah.
It was interesting to have that experience, to see it, to actually see it a lot of the time, because at least I live in my own little bubble with my wife and kids, and I have my hockey friends. Most of my film friends I have thanks to the internet, which is great.
Digital friendship, baby.
It's fantastic. So I don't know if I have a meaningful relationship with what we could dub the general audience outside of my immediate family, like my brother and sister and my parents, that don't go to the theater all that much. So sometimes I do try to mine their insights on things to maybe gauge certain reactions that I'm trying to get. But like I did find that interesting, especially because it was a plethora of those comments. It wasn't just one or two or three. It was like every comment was, Disney, take note. This is what we want.
And it's interesting to say that to Disney to take note when so many of their live action remakes have kind of been at least sequence for sequence already.
Yeah, exactly. Like, why did Lilo and Stitch not get the same reaction? Why did The Lion King not get that kind of passion? I don't know. It's an interesting conversation.
What makes what makes How to Train Your Dragon here different? And I think you're right. I think there is maybe at least one name we can throw out there as to why. I think there are other factors as to why, which I'm sure we'll get to when we get to our thoughts on the film. But I do think it is really interesting that this one is being more forgiven by mostly critics, when a lot of these same critics are the ones who have been clamoring for these live action remakes to either stop or to actually take artistic liberties and do their own thing.
Mhm.
And it's a
Yeah.
really fascinating situation.
It is. And maybe it just speaks to, and people are finally coming around to the prowess of it,
Mhm.
just how good that How to Train Your Dragon movie is, that first one.
Mhm.
Maybe it is that, because I feel like, again, when we're talking about the best animated films ever made, generally that isn't a film that is brought up as a top 5, let's say.
Yeah.
I just feel like it's lost in the discourse when that specific conversation is being had. But maybe this is indicative of, because it is the same movie. It is shot for shot, beat for beat the same.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just indicative of how good the original material is. Maybe that's all that it is. And this film is reminding people of that.
I think the perfect double feature is this How to Train Your Dragon with Gus Van Sant's Psycho.
Yeah. I think so. It's funny that you say that, because I guested on a podcast this last weekend. I think it's coming out sometime this week, the Real Spoilers podcast. And
Oh,
that
yeah,
was
yeah.
exactly the comparison they made as well. They
I think
said
a lot
the
of people
exact
are.
same thing.
I think I saw it in Matt Singer's review at Screen Crush as well. So I know a lot of critics out there are making the Psycho comparison already. I can't take credit for that, obviously.
For sure. All right. Well, are we ready to transition into this then?
Yeah, I think we've already kind of alluded to where this conversation is eventually going to go. I think it's a nice transitional point.
All right. Now that we've laid that out, and I guess the last final thought I'll just say, and this is actually a good transition into Sam and bringing him into the conversation here. You and I don't want to say grew up because we were adults, but we certainly were around and active cinephiles when those movies came out, the How to Train Your Dragon movies. And we were doing this show, obviously, when 2 and 3 came out.
Yeah.
So we've been around, we come up with those movies. My son and this younger generation, this is probably going to be their experience with that trilogy, these live action movies.
This is going to be their gateway into it.
This is going to be their gateway, yeah. And I can see why, with that in mind, perhaps why DreamWorks and Dean DeBlois wanted to essentially recreate the same thing, just in quote unquote live action, in the same way that a certain generation went for the Star Wars prequels versus the OG films. But the prequels are the ones they defend. Those are the films they champion because they grew up with those. You know, the people that grew up in the 70s and 80s are obviously going to champion the original trilogy. I'm sure a younger audience might do the same. I don't know. The sequel trilogy is so polarized. Who knows?
I don't even want to talk about it anymore.
Yeah. But we've seen that at the very least with the sequel Star Wars movies. People grew up with those, and despite the quality, they champion them anyway.
Sure.
And I think that's going to be the same thing with my son Sam and his generation and this trilogy of How to Train Your Dragon. They're going to go to the live action films because that's what they're going to grow up with.
Yeah.
It makes sense. It makes sense. I'm sure we'll talk about that more.
Yeah.
All right. Before Brendan and I get into the film, let's bring in my son Sam and let's get his thoughts on the film. All right. We are now joined once again by my lovely son Sam. Sam, say hi to the people.
Hi, guys.
Sam went to see this with me. We went on Father's Day. It was very exciting. We went to one of the Regal VIP screenings, which was really cool. Had a great time doing that. Sam, before we get your thoughts on this movie, tell everyone, what do you think about the animated How to Train Your Dragon movies?
So, I can't really say anything because don't remember anything.
You don't remember?
So, I
It's
can't
been a
say
while
anything.
since you've seen them.
But, speaking of Father's Day, tell me what I got for you on Father's Day. Remember what I got you?
You got me a really cool shirt.
Yeah, I got him a Utah Mammoth shirt.
Utah Mammoth
The new
hockey
hockey
shirt.
team.
Yeah, exactly. Which was really cool.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring that up, because Brendan and I would have already talked about this, is that this will be your version of How to Train Your Dragon. Brendan and I, we grew up on the animated films. We're very close to that. And this will be your version of it, which I think is really cool. Yeah. So tell everyone, Sam, what did you think about the new live action How to Train Your Dragon? What did you think?
I think it was good, but the only thing I can't say that could be true, but you could, is that everything is there's stuff that's the same, because I don't know anything about the animated. But I think it was really good, especially the opening scene where the dragons attack the city. Mm-hmm. That I know, because I watched it at school. I know that is correct.
Yeah.
But jump scares. They were definitely, when he unties it, that definitely jump scared me.
Wait, which part again?
So when he unties Toothless.
Oh yeah.
That
Okay.
the roar when he roars at him,
Uh-huh.
that kind of scared me.
Okay. So you had a little bit of a jump scare. Some of it is the same for sure. There's a lot of it that is the same from the animated film. But that aside, what did you think about Hiccup and Toothless?
Hiccup and Toothless. Okay. Toothless, I can't really say anything about him because he's just the same.
But he's cool, right?
Yeah.
You like him?
But they're both animated, so there's nothing really to say.
Yeah.
If you can see up here, they both look the same.
If you're listening to the show and you're not watching on YouTube, we have a DVD cover for How to Train Your Dragon 2 sitting right next to Sam. That's what he's pointing to. So he's pointing to Toothless on the cover to demonstrate the similarities.
Yeah. And we have a poster.
Yes. Okay, so aside from the visual similarities and how similar they are in terms of the beats, but you liked the story, you like how it was told?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything stand out to you?
Well, there's a few things, but I'm going to just say one of them.
Okay.
When he says, well, there's two, I say.
Okay.
But I'm not trying to make it too long. When they not first meet, when they get to know each other on the beach, I like that. But I really like how when he makes his face in the sand, because I was at a camp and I was making faces as well. Mm-hmm. So and when he says it's working, that line stand out to me because that was the one I remembered in the trailer, which that's what I got it from.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But also when they say when the big dragon in the nest,
at the end.
Yeah, when they say Hiccup says, "I know, Dad," that just really stands out to me.
Yeah, that was a cool line.
That is not, to me, it's not cool. It's not emotional, but it's just, it touches my heart.
So emotional.
Yeah. Because it reminds me of me and him.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That was a really great moment. I like that a lot as well. That was very moving. And you're right, the moment where Hiccup is drawing in the sand, that I call that sequence the Forbidden Friendship scene, because that's the name of the track that is underscored in John Powell's score, which is really great. That whole sequence is fantastic in the animated film. I think it's one of the best animated scenes of all time. They do a good job of recreating that in this version. So I'm glad to hear that it moved you, that it was really great. Because that is really fun to see that dynamic, right? Between those two in that moment.
Yeah.
Okay. What did you think about the flying scene?
I really liked when Hiccup flies with Asher.
Astrid, yeah.
Ashton. Is that
Yeah.
it? Ashton. I like.
You like that flying sequence? That
Yeah.
one's really cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really gorgeous when
Yeah.
they're flying there at night
Yeah.
and the sun sets there.
But the one thing
Yeah.
is because I just like the night sky with all the stars because I've been getting into Star Wars.
So it reminded you of Star Wars? a
Yeah.
little bit?
But it's just so beautiful seeing all the stars.
Yeah.
And yeah, because like we used to look at the stars in the sky at
Yeah.
night.
So it reminds you of the
Yeah.
sunsets and it's really gorgeous.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're trying to say. Is
And
that
there
it's
is,
really pretty.
and I do like the sunsets as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that scene was really cool. The flying
Yeah.
scenes are fun. What did you think about the dragons and how?
Dragons?
Yeah,
Like all of them
like them fighting the dragons throughout the movie.
fighting?
Yeah, or when they're like learning how to fight the
Oh,
dragons
I'll-
in the arena.
I don't like it at first because Hiccup is a main character,
Yeah.
and I don't like when he gets bullied. Because I
Okay. Oh,
don't
yeah.
like when people bully each other.
Yeah. That's fair.
I
Yeah,
don't.
That's
like bullying.
understandable, but he eventually makes friends with them.
Yeah.
right? So that's like a cool lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like when he like actually starts to know how to control him because Toothless helps him.
That's right.
Even though he can't like speak, he helps him because if he like touches their nose, I would say, it just calms them down.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
Toothless helps him, and
He
that's
does.
and that's kind of a lesson. Like if you're deaf, you can still learn from something.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same when he learns about the eels, right? Like that's
Yeah.
a trick that he learns all these tricks.
Wait, what eel?
Like when he pulls out the eel and Toothless doesn't
Oh,
like
yeah,
it,
yeah,
so he uses that with the other dragons in the arena.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're right. Toothless does help him learn these various tricks that eventually
Yeah.
bonds him with the other
Yeah.
people in the village. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a bit of a ruse, obviously, because eventually they all learn when he has to do the final kill, the quote unquote final kill, and he can't do it, and he has to be saved there by Astrid, and his dad comes in and they capture Toothless.
Yeah. I do not like when they capture
I
Toothless.
know it's sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Toothless, I don't. It's like a mix because I like that they capture him because then it leads into a scene that I really like, which is when they attack the nest. But it's also that I don't like it because it's just Toothless is really the best character there.
Yeah.
Well, most people. To me, I would say it's either his dad or Hiccup.
Yeah.
But a lot of people like Toothless, so it just I just don't like it when they capture him.
I know it is.
So it's kind of like a 50-50, if
Yeah.
you would say.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's very fair. That's understandable. So from there, so they capture Toothless, and that's a sad moment.
Yeah.
But
like
it
it.
leads to that final action scene at the end when the big dragon comes out. And
Yeah. And that's the scene that I really like. Sorry to
Yeah.
cut you off, though.
no, that's fine. Go ahead.
But let me look at my notes.
Well, why do you look at your notes?
Yeah, you
so-
talk for now.
So with the final scene, and I want to get your thoughts on this because you were just talking about Toothless and how sad he is when he's captured, but there's that moment when Hiccup's dad jumps in to save Toothless, and it's like fascinating
Because he does not like dragons.
Exactly.
But
So
it's
it's a
because
big moment for
that
him, right?
that's turning like I was confused, but then I understand. So I was like, "Huh? Don't like dragons?" But then I was like, "Oh."
Yeah.
Because
Because
Not really.
it shows that
Yeah.
Hiccup has finally shown him
Yeah.
the goodness of dragons, right?
Yeah. But that's the part that mostly gets to me. But that's the part that's good because then it leads up to everyone liking dragons
Exactly.
at the end.
Exactly.
Speaking of that, there's when they again go fly again, Toothless and Hiccup like at the end. I like that part. It's good.
It is good.
But one of the parts I do not like, which I don't know if it was an animated film,
I'll tell
so
you.
check me.
I will.
But I do not like when they kiss. I hate when they kiss.
Okay, so
That's the part I don't like.
they do kiss
I don't
in
like-
the animated film.
They do?
They do. Yeah, that happens. So, and look, like you might not like it now, but
Because
later on,
I am a kid, though. You can't understand that.
you are. That's what
But-
I'm saying. Just give it a few years. You'll come
Yeah.
around.
When I get older, I'll probably get used to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't like the kissing and
But it's just because I haven't seen a lot of animated movies that kiss.
No, that's true.
Because,
it doesn't
like-
happen a lot in animated movies.
Like the Wild Robot, it's a robot. So,
Mm.
and there's not like a lot of stuff.
No, that's true. That is
And yeah.
different. That is different for you, so that's understandable. But thankfully,
And I
it's
have
just
gone
couple
to a
scenes.
lot of animated movies with him, but there's not really any kissing.
That's
So
true.
I just don't really like it because yeah,
That's true. That is different. You're
Yeah.
right about that.
yeah.
Okay, but aside from the kiss, the ending, and the
It's
and
good.
everything's
I
good. Yeah.
I like all of it.
What did you think about the music?
Music?
Yeah, the score.
Yeah, I like it.
Good, right?
I remember when we were driving to it and he was just blasting the music.
We were listening on the way to the theater. Yeah.
But I I heard some music that he was playing, but I don't remember how it goes. But I do remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm gonna let you talk after this, but
Well, keep going.
I like when he draws the sketch because I can't blame him. I can't draw.
Like when he sketches out.
Yeah.
Toothless? Yeah.
Yeah, when he sketches out toothless. But because I can give him props for that because I can't draw. I can't draw.
Okay. Well, that's exciting. Is there anything else from the movie you want to talk about? Do you have a favorite scene or favorite
Favorite
moment?
scene. It's hard to think. It's either when they first fly or when they start or when Ashton and Toothless and Hiccup fly. But I would probably say it's when all three of them fly.
When they all three fly.
Yeah.
Which we already talked about. You mentioned that already.
Yeah, but that's
Okay.
probably my favorite scene.
Okay, so what would you rate this movie?
Movie
You know, what grade would you give it?
grade
Yeah.
like in school.
Yeah, like in school.
I would give it at least maybe like an A or a 9.
Oh, okay.
9
Like-
like that.
So if we're counting out of 10, like an 8 out of 10,
No, like a 9.
like a 9 out of 10?
Because
Okay.
of that one part that I already explained.
Yeah, yeah.
But rather than that, so it's really like a 9.5. But rather than that, great movie. I think you should go watch it.
Okay, a recommendation from Sam.
Yep.
9.5 out of 10. A film that I'm sure we'll
But-
rewatch.
If you haven't watched the animated, I think you should at least watch the first one and then go see it.
Okay.
So you have some parts in mind that you.
All right. Well, you get a thumbs up, a recommendation
Thumbs
from
up.
Sam. Sam, thanks for being here and joining us. I appreciate it.
You are welcome. And I will see you guys on Elio.
All right. My thanks again to Sam for joining me. That was really fun. I hope people enjoyed
I
that.
love Sam.
Really endearing. I love having
Wish I
him
was there
here.
for it. Wish the schedules
I
worked
know.
out.
For sure. Do love having him here, though. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into this. Let's give our thoughts on the film.
hmm
How to Train Your Dragon, live action, quote unquote, is directed by Dean DeBlois.
It's certainly more live action than 2019's The Lion King.
For sure. And it stars John Powell.
And there's the name. There's the name.
Yeah, he is the biggest star of this movie. It also stars Mason Thames, Nico Parker. Gerard Butler is back as Stoic the Vast, Nick Frost, Julian Dennison, Bronnon James, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. This is How to Train Your Dragon. I don't know if I need to give anyone a synopsis. Even if you haven't seen the film, I feel like you have a general idea.
You've heard of this
is.
world. You've heard of the iconography of this thing.
Yes, absolutely. It's dragons on the village on the island of Burke. It's Hiccup, it's Toothless, and, you know, them fighting dragons. And Hiccup trying to teach everyone that dragons aren't so bad.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what we're getting at here. All right, Brendan, what did you think about the live action How to Train Your Dragon?
This is the most interesting live action remake we've gotten yet, whether it be from Disney or DreamWorks. And the reason why it's so interesting is because it is also so uninteresting. It goes back to what you were talking about in the opening here, JD. This TikTok that your wife sent you about what people are asking for from these things. And full disclosure, we sort of alluded to this already. You and I are on a different island. We don't belong to the island of Burke. We belong to a very different island that when a live action remake is coming, we want to see new, unique takes on this material. That's what we want. We might not be in the majority in that, but that's what we want to see. So when this was first announced, I thought, okay, curious. Dean DeBlois is coming back to direct. Okay, now I'm less interested. John Powell is coming back to do the score. Okay, now I'm even less interested. Gerard Butler's coming back to reprise his role as Stoic. Now I don't even care about this movie anymore. That was I hate to sound cynical, but that really was my reaction because it's doing everything that I don't want from live action remakes. Yet this is the first time where I thought to myself, I could kind of see this shot for shot approach eventually working for me because this does have a few things going for it that many of its Disney counterparts just don't have. One of them being, John Powell, his score, he's adapting his own music. He's not really doing anything new at all, but it just speaks to how good that score always was. It's also the fact that DreamWorks here does understand, unlike Disney, that this story does translate well to live action. They knew that and they understood that. And by bringing back Dean DeBlois, as much as I push back on that idea, it does create this idea of someone coming back to spearhead their own creation because they're just that passionate about it. They just love it that much. And there are individual pockets in this movie where I felt that DreamWorks and Dean and John and the actors on screen did have a genuine appreciation for this source material, which is what I cannot say about what Disney has been doing, whether it be a shot-for-shot remake or some other different take that they do. This feels, well, I'd still say this feels like a business move, which is why I'm still very mixed on the movie overall. I felt less of that business side of things when compared to the influx of them from Disney. There's at least more of a movie happening here. I don't think it's always a great movie. It still doesn't quite have the cinematic prowess that I would have loved to see given the people behind the camera like Bill Pope cinematography and whatnot. But this was the first time I came close to thinking, if you're going to do a shot-for-shot remake and you just simply make it an amazing version of it yet again, I can kind of understand that. I don't think this one quite gets there, but this is the first time I started to think, maybe this could work. Maybe it'll happen with How to Train Your Dragon 2, since that's already been greenlit and Dean DeBlois is coming back for that as well. Who knows?
Yeah.
I think as a movie, the movie that we got here, I think it's fine. It mostly works in individual pockets where it's reliant on your familiarity with the animated film. At least it is for me, because it is a bunch of actors reciting lines that existed as opposed to conveying new information for us for the first time. And I do think that's very much felt for those of us who are very familiar with that animated trilogy. But I did feel a few pockets here and there where I thought these people were making something that they truly wanted to make. not fully, but more so than I could say about even something like Lilo and Stitch. I felt that a little bit more. And maybe that's the thing that people are latching on to, that they're, feeling here, and maybe why it's slowly converting people who have been a bit more cynical of what the live action remake could be. I think that's part of it.
Yeah. Earlier in this conversation, we brought up some context as to the animated films, why we love them, perhaps why that made us a little trepidatious for this live action film.
Mhm.
I want to also add that on episode 213 of this podcast, now that was quite a few years ago. That was 2017. We did our top 3 animated films we want to see as live action remakes.
Oh yeah, we did do that, didn't we?
How to Train Your Dragon was my number 2 on that list. I always felt as if this material was ripe for live action. I think if you give this story a new and different and interesting spin, given the setting, the characters, we're working with dragons, that in live action could be really incredible. So when they announced that they were doing a live action adaptation, initially I was very, very excited. I really did think that this could work in live action. Then they dropped that first trailer, and we immediately see that they did nothing to reinvent this material at all.
Right.
And to echo Brendan, I am with you wholeheartedly in the sense of that I don't need a beat for beat regurgitation. I just don't find that interesting. Make it new, make it different, keep the same spirit. You can keep the same emotionality, but do something new and interesting. I will always champion that live action Mulan. It doesn't always work. There are blemishes, but at the very least, that film is nothing like its animated counterpart. Absolutely nothing like the animated film. And I love the animated Mulan.
Same. It's very
but
good.
I did not want them to do a beat for beat regurgitation. So I like, the more that we get these remakes from Disney, that one actually might be my favorite, even if it's not the best one. There are better remakes.
I am slowly appreciating that one more. I don't think it always works as a movie. I think Cinderella is maybe the best example of succeeding as a movie while still being its own thing. But that also predates the movement or the influx of this. So
I agree.
It wasn't a marketing ploy by that point.
Yeah, they let Kenneth Branagh make a Kenneth Branagh movie. They don't do that anymore.
They don't do that anymore. When they have a string of successes, the filmmakers have less say.
Which is ironic because they're actually moving away from the formula, not repeating it.
Yeah, exactly.
At any rate, I digress. We digress. That is to say, I wanted this to be more like a Mulan, even if it didn't always work. Do something new and different.
Yeah.
Now, from a business perspective, does that make sense? Clearly not.
No.
Because this movie is doing gangbusters. It did very well at the box office. And even going back to said TikTok that my wife sent me, clearly this is the movie people want to see. They do want the beat for beat remakes. So I probably should change my perspectives or anticipation. They're just simply going to keep doing these beat for beat remakes. Now, that said, despite my reservations, and I did have deep reservations going into this movie, coming out of it, I have never been more angry at myself than how I felt coming out of the theater after watching this How to Train Your Dragon. Because I think as a movie, it's quite dull and mundane. This is a film that wants to be a cartoon. It doesn't have any interest in being a live action movie. None whatsoever. There are a few elements where it leans into its live action qualities. I think of the test drive sequence in particular. I do think that is actually quite inspired and really good. outside of that, and I do want to give some credit to Mason Thames and Nico Parker as Hiccup and Astrid. There are a few elements with their dynamic that feels more grounded. But when I look at the rest of this movie, Nick Frost, the other friend characters of Hiccup,
Oh yeah,
you look
Fish
at
Leg.
Gabriel Howell,
Yeah.
Julian Dennison, Bronwyn James. Yeah, those characters, they are cartoons. in
There
this
is
movie.
something very like there's an
Flat out
uncanny
cartoons.
valley to their performances given
Yes.
the world that they're existing in here.
Yeah, and I don't want to necessarily harp on their performances because I think they're doing exactly what they've been asked to do.
Oh yeah, it's not their fault. They're succeeding in doing what they were told. It's as simple as that.
And what are they doing? They are regurgitating the same dynamic, the same vocal mannerisms and movement of the animated characters and the vocal performances that voiced them originally. They are doing nothing interesting. This film would have been better off, actually, if they took the actors at Epic Universe here in Orlando, right down the road. If they took those actors who are literally mimicking the voice actors
It's not
from the animated film, at least they do it. They do a much better job of it. And if that's going to be,
even their costuming is mirroring the animated movie.
Yes.
It's not tied to this movie at all. This movie
It's not-
like aesthetically exists in its own space, even though it's you know
Yes.
beat for beat the cartoonisms of the
And if
animated
you-
movie.
and if you're gonna be a cartoon, if you want to mimic the original animated film, those actors at Epic Universal in Orlando do a better job of getting closer to what is there in that animated film. And not only that, you get the double dip because they're literally there at the park. So if you want this film to be essentially a huge budget billboard to get people to go to that park, well, look, the actors in the movie, they're right there at the park too. So feels like a missed opportunity. That's all I'm saying. If I was the director of marketing at DreamWorks, that's what I would have done.
It makes sense. Makes sense, man.
But that is to say, that is what this film wants to be, a cartoon. It has almost no interest in being live action outside of a few elements here and there. And I think that tone, in contrast to some of the film's imagery, not all of it, some of the imagery is still quite cartoonish, but when it does get live action and you're coupling in real people, obviously they're on camera, but it's all rendered in this cartoonish way, it is extremely jarring. Very, very jarring. So like there's a lot about this film that I don't think works at all. Now that said, and sorry to keep rambling on here, Brendan.
You're
but
good.
this
You're
is
good. You're good.
important.
I know you're arriving to a certain point that I can't wait to hear.
All of that said, from scene to scene, I found myself mostly disengaged from the adaptation element. The moment I hear John Powell, though, I turn into a puddle. I immediately melt.
And there's a
And
lot
I
of
could not
score.
help
There's
myself.
still a lot of score here.
And I will say, and this is not going to happen, this is my own little fantasy, so just kind of bear with me for a moment. If all of this comes to pass so that John Powell can finally win the Oscar for his score for this film, totally worth it. I'm glad they made it. I like that would totally make up for everything for me if that was to happen.
That's
it won't
like-
though, because the
Yeah.
stupid Academy has stupid math rules when it comes to scores.
Well, that would be, in a way, that would be like if Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie decide to just randomly make a Mission Impossible 9 just so they can win the new stunt Oscar when it becomes eligible.
Which they should.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it is, I don't know if John Powell's doing anything new or different. I mean, literally there is, because the film is 30 minutes longer, or about 20, 25 minutes longer than the
I
animated
mean, the
film.
end credits sound a little different.
Yeah. But mostly it is the exact same score, which I'm kind of okay with because, again, I respond to it. There's a Pavlovian element that as soon as that score kicks in, it doesn't matter what's on screen, I immediately melt. So when that original theme kicks in, even at the beginning of the film, This Is Burke, that first track on that original soundtrack, it gave me goosebumps. And then as the film went along, and you especially get to the forbidden friendship moment, which I gotta say, as far as score tracks goes, the titles of them, that has to be up there as one of the very best.
That's a great score title. Yeah.
Great score title, and the music itself is great. And again, all it took was the first note. As soon as I heard the first note of Forbidden Friendship and I see Toothless there on screen, I turned into a waterfall. I could not help myself. And then Test Drive, when that comes in, same thing. Or Romantic Flight, when we get to that point at the kind of transitioning into the third act. Where's Hiccup, that track, when that comes in. And the final track that we get at the end of the film as well. There's something about the magic of John Powell. I don't know the episode number, forgive me, but one of the last episodes we ever did with Ryan and Jay when they were here on the show was the best movie scores of all time.
Yeah.
That score for How to Train Your Dragon, John Powell, was brought up in that conversation. I don't exactly remember the context or where, but I do know that we talked about it as being one of the best scores of all time. And to this date, one of my favorite memories is that I got to say that to John Powell's face because I got to interview him a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I said that to his face. That score is one of the best of all time. So I'm kind of glad that he didn't really change much because it did allow me to engage with this world where otherwise there wasn't much for me to engage with here.
I do wonder, if that is the big thing as to why this one is succeeding more so than its live action Disney counterparts. And I think if the rest of the movie had that same energy as John Powell just simply transcribing his own score, he's not even adapting it. He's just transcribing it note for note. And the movie itself does have that energy. It's less of an adaptation and more of a transcription. Say what you will about The Lion King, the 2019 film, while that is very much sequence for sequence, by revisualizing it in a new way that ultimately doesn't work for that movie, that's more of an adaptation than this movie even is, I would say. But I think this movie's a lot better. Now, again, maybe John Powell's the reason why I found myself thinking, could I finally forgive one of these live action remakes for being a shot for shot remake if every component has that kind of passion and energy? And I don't think the movie here itself fully does. I'm with you. I think, visually speaking, I think it is kind of mundane. I think some of the performances are a bit off. There is definitely some type of tonal inconsistency happening here when many of these young actors are really told to give cartoonish performances in a world that doesn't really require it. But again, like I said in my opening thoughts, this is the first time I could see myself forgiving a live action remake for doing the same thing, because I saw the pockets of where, hey, that worked before. We love why it worked. Let's just maintain that love and passion in a new visual form. And I sometimes did see that and sense that, mostly from John Powell. There are a few other components here as well. They're like that. The test drive sequence in this movie, I still think is pretty good. It feels very similar, but
I agree.
Also doesn't feel very similar. Like it kind of sits in this new middle space between familiar and new, which I think is pretty good. And I think it's because the visual effects are overall pretty successful for the most part here. I do wish, visually speaking, it didn't quite have that same like gray, desaturated kind of look that we sometimes see from many blockbusters these days. I miss the days when big movies that take place on the open seas looked and felt like the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. And I think this movie needed more of that kind of tangible energy. If it did, I think there would have been something special here. But I saw the seeds of something special, even if it was the same thing. It's a really fascinating attempt at this that makes it very unique when compared to some of these other ones.
Well, and that's another thing I want to hit on because I didn't really get a chance to talk about it because of my long tangent. So forgive me.
You're good. You're good.
But I think you do hit on something compelling. Well, I don't think that the film works much in terms of its tone and like the contrast of live action and also it just wanting to be a cartoon, I think is extremely jarring.
I'm with
And
you.
It does create this mundanity that just kept me disengaged. But at the same time, I don't think you're wrong. The reason I walked out of the theater mad, because while I don't think it's a great movie, I was immensely moved by it. I did shed real actual tears during this experience. Now, part of it could have been that Sam was sitting there with me. He took me to see this as a Father's Day outing, just
That's
the two
so
of us, which was
sweet.
really fun, and it was really great. And he had a great time, obviously, as you all heard a few moments ago. And so we had a great experience, and certainly that's part of it. It's the John Powell element of it. So it's just this weird juxtaposition where I don't think the film is great. There's a lot to it that doesn't work, and yet I am immensely moved. Why? Is it just because of John Powell? It could be that, but I do think you make a great point. The other reason I think that it is effective and why I was moved and why, again, going back to that TikTok, why audiences are just raving over this movie is that Dean DeBlois essentially recreated that animated film. This film might not have had any interest in being a live action movie, but that animated How to Train Your Dragon is a masterpiece. And he essentially got to do that again. And you can tell that he loves that story.
And
he
I think
loves
that's
these characters.
yeah.
There is a sincerity to this material that he clearly cares about. And he does pour in passion. Whether this was his first attempt at it or not, I know he's talked about how he tried working with photorealism. It wasn't really working for whatever reason. I think personally, I think the heads up or the higher ups at DreamWorks and Universal were like, no, we're not doing the photorealism.
Just do the same thing again.
We're just going to do the exact same thing. So like, I do kind of wonder if Dean DeBlois had his way, how different this would have been. But given his directives, and we know that he loves this material, he directed all 3 of those How to Train Your Dragon movies, that there is a passion there that is missing in something like The Lion King or Lilo and Stitch. There wasn't that same passion in those movies. So despite them being beat for beat and quite the same, I do think that is the difference. When they did 2019 Lion King, and we talked about it at the time, James Earl Jones, rest in peace.
Yeah.
Incredible. Love his original performance. His role as Mufasa in that film wasn't nearly as inspired. The new casting didn't really work.
Yeah. James Earl Jones in that movie was purely a nostalgia grab.
Nostalgia grab. The Hans Zimmer score was probably the most effective, but I don't know if it grabbed me the same way that John Powell does here. And look, that Hans Zimmer score, I do think from 1994, that original Lion King is an all-timer as well.
But it has a different energy in that remake of The Lion King, which John Powell's work here, it has a different energy at times, but it still has the same passionate energy.
And again, I don't know if this is true. I do really like John Powell, but if we're having an honest conversation, Hans Zimmer, his career, I do think is more prolific. It is more successful. There's a wider range. And John Powell has done some really great things. His what he did, the solo film, which I think was really good. He's done some other great work.
That was a good score, yeah.
But there's nothing that comes close to notoriety with John Powell like How to Train Your Dragon. Hans Zimmer, there's 24 scores that will define his career. John Powell does not have that.
Yeah.
So I do think that plays a bit of a role. and I think John Powell recognizes that. And again, I don't say that to disparage him, because I do really like his work, and I especially love his score for this film. But I think that plays a role as to why that same passion and that same spirit is here versus something like The Lion King.
Yeah.
And you do feel that with all of the other elements of the film. They did care about this story, and they did want to essentially recreate it for a new generation and remind parents who are probably fans of that animated film why that story is great.
Yeah.
And look, while I do have a lot of problems with the film, I cannot deny it that. I can't.
Yeah.
And I do think it's effective there.
And that's why I think it's a really interesting one. I think people, whether they know it or not, are able to sense that different passion, that different energy in this one when compared to many of these other Disney live action remakes. They might not be able to articulate what they're feeling and why it's different, but I do think that is the significant difference. I really do think it comes down to that. I think it even comes down to some of the individual performances that are bringing that same level of passion to their respective characters, even if it is very familiar. I did not like James Earl Jones in the live action, quote unquote, live action Lion King. I think he's terrific as Mufasa, but I don't think he brings anything to that particular iteration of the Lion King. Like I said, it was a nostalgia grab. Gerard Butler is terrific in this movie. He is borderline amazing here. What he does is that he understood what worked about Stoic in the animated movie, and he adds facial tics and eye movements to add even further clarity in making it work even further.
Which is a big part of the character in the animated film. So he did need to, again, he doesn't have to do it verbatim, but having that animated look on his face, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Like those facial tics you're talking about is such a big part of the expressiveness of the character in that animated film. And the way he makes it his own here, to your point, is really great.
He finds a way to do the same thing, but I wouldn't say he makes it better, but he heightens it. He finds that new middle ground there. I think Nick Frost is actually very effective as well.
Yeah.
I think some of the adult actors, I think, do a much better job than some of the kid actors here, especially the secondary kids like Fish Legs, for instance. Julian Dennison, I do love him quite a bit, but I do think he's most of the kids here are just simply tasked with reciting lines that existed in the animated movie, and they're not really given any new breath to take it any further. At the very least, Mason Thames kind of gives Hiccup a new energy. This Hiccup does feel very different than the Hiccup we got in the animated movie. I do think if this movie's trying to recapture the same Hiccup that we saw in the animated movie, Mason Thames is severely miscast. He kind of reminds me a bit of when Andrew Garfield played Peter Parker / Spider-Man. He got Spider-Man right, but didn't quite get Peter Parker right. He was just too cool for that, right? Yeah. Like I didn't believe that he was someone that was made fun of in that school. And I don't always believe that Mason Thames' version of Hiccup is someone that would be seen as a dorky outcast. I don't always buy it. But I think the way he plays Hiccup, I think it's going to work when we get this iteration of Hiccup in the sequel. I think he's at that point where he'll sell those components more effectively.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I did mention Mason Thames and Nico Parker earlier. I do want to echo real quick, though, Gerard Butler is fantastic here. I do agree. Going back to something my son said about that moment near the end when he's talking to Hiccup about how proud he is of him, and Hiccup responds to him saying, "I know." I do agree with Sam. That is one of the best elements of this film as well. And it works because of these performances. Gerard Butler is fantastic at delivering that dialogue, making that poignant. And I do really like Mason Thames here. And I think the reason it works, maybe it's a little bit of a double-edged sword to your point about how unbelievable he may be in terms of Hiccup being this outcast in this world. I think he makes that work enough. Could that be biased? based off of how I see the character in the original, knowing what to expect, maybe. But I think Thames does enough to make it work. The real reason I love the performance here is he feels like, outside of Nico Parker and Gerard Butler, he's the only one that understands that this is live action, that it's not meant to be a cartoon.
Yeah.
And he
does feel like a
middle
human
ground
being
perfectly.
at times. Yeah.
He feels like a real person in this world. And I do feel the same about Nico Parker as well. I do love their dynamic. They felt like grounded characters in a setting that is, again, quote unquote, tangible. That is live action. So I do like those performances. Everyone else, though, and again, I don't think it's wholly their fault. I think they're doing what they've been directed. And maybe our only disparity here is Nick Frost. I didn't really care for Nick Frost all that much. Partially because he just, again, it's a cartoon character in this world.
There are moments where he pauses and lets a certain thing linger that I felt more humanity there, but they are few and far between. I don't think it's quite as effective as, let's say, Gerard Butler is.
Yeah. Well, I will say it is, like, that criticism is much more pronounced with Snot Loud and Fish Legs and Rough Nut and Tough Nut.
Oh my
and those
gosh,
characters,
yeah.
for sure. So again, I do agree that Nick Frost he can maybe ride that middle ground a little bit. It's certainly much better than those characters, for sure.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But I do really like that main trio of Thames, Parker, and Butler. They're really good. If we get more of that in How to Train Your Dragon 2, that would be fantastic. I don't foresee that happening because, again, this just wants to be a cartoon. And Dean DeBlois knows animation really well. So I think he just did his damnedest to make another animated movie.
Yeah, just with a different
that's what
lens.
this comes out to. Yeah.
I am worried about that sequel, which he is tapped to direct. Apparently, it's coming out in 2017, which already gives me a lot of pause.
2017? We're going back in time?
2027. Well, I don't even know what years are anymore. I still
say, they invented time travel?
It's going back in time to
know about
replace the hidden world is what it's doing. This is the new hidden world, time travel.
Okay. Interesting.
Well, I guess, yeah, they're fast tracking this in only 2 years, which is kind of ridiculous, I feel like. Because Dean is already saying things about how not only does he want to cast Cate Blanchett as Valka, which of course he does. I get that. But I guess he also wants to make improvements to the animated movie, which already doesn't really need any improvements. So I don't really know what he's talking about. That gives me a lot of anxiety and trepidation with regard to that sequel. But if that sequel is going to more or less do the same thing that this one did and basically be a shot for shot or sequence for sequence retelling of that second animated movie, I just hope it tightens up the things that don't work about this one. You know, make it less gray, make it more visually grand, make it look special, make it fully tap into whatever passion and love they have for this franchise, which are here in pockets, but make it fully that. Then I'll be able to get on board with this whole notion of just doing the same thing again if it simply provokes me to understand that they love what they're doing and they love this medium and they love this property. And then I might be okay with that. That's all I hope is just those little things get tightened up.
I agree. I don't really have anything else to add. And I think since we're running a little long here with the inclusion of Sam being on the show here, I do want to get out of here. Selfishly speaking, as we're recording this, the Florida Panthers have just won the Stanley Cup, so I need to go.
Oh my gosh. You're recording a podcast during that? Dude.
I watched the first two periods. I was able to watch the first two periods thanks
You didn't
to
watch
our
the
crazy
third? That's what
scheduling
matters,
thing.
man.
Well, we had to get on here and rail on How to Train Your Dragon. So,
Man.
so I'm going to get out of here and go celebrate. But yeah, I mean, I will stay open-minded to How to Train Your Dragon 2. I don't want him to make any changes. I wish that I could speak to him directly because that film is masterful. Please don't change it. Cate Blanchett coming back would be really fun, though. So we'll see about that. All right. With all of that said, we're going to wind down here. If you agree or disagree, and look, a lot of you might disagree with this, with our thoughts, and that's perfectly fine. Leave a comment below. We would love to hear from you. Same thing on social media. You can email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. All right. it's been a crazy busy week. There's a lot that we have released. Episode 641, Adam Kempenar came on the show once again. We talked about the best movies of the decade so far. That was a lot of fun. Brandon Lewis, the great Brandon Lewis, the champion of materialists, came on the show to help us review that film from Celine Song. The great Ryan McQuaid came on the show to talk about the life of Chuck with Brendan. That was lovely. Go and check that out as well. We had Patreon bonus content. You need to go and check that out. And there will be a new Women in Session. I am going to be gone for a week. We will have a main show coming out next week that Brendan will release to everybody. So if anything crazy happens on social media, I will be gone. Brendan and Dave are in charge. So if the house burns down, it's on them.
I'll take it. I like burning down houses. Become the arsonist podcast.
With all of that said, everyone have a great time. I'm going to go get drunk celebrating a Panthers Stanley Cup.
Congrats, my
we will
friend.
see you all next time on the In Session Film Podcast. John Powell.
Go Panthers.
Give him an
John
Oscar.
Powell.
Give John Powell an Oscar.
Give him a Stanley Cup.